de-escalate this conflict and facilitate the transfer of humanitarian assistance. The high-level representation is indicative of the urgency to overcome the crisis and to engage in dialogue in order to find viable solutions to the complex and recurring challenges our region faces. And in this regard, Cyprus' approach to tackling the current crisis is governed by the following elements. First, terrorism is a common threat for all countries, and there is never any justification. We have therefore unequivocally condemned Hamas terrorist attack on October 7. Second, the fact that Hamas does not represent Palestinian people or the Palestinian cause. Third, the right to self-defense must always be exercised in line with international law, including international humanitarian law. Four, the need for permanent de-escalation. Fifth, the vital importance of protecting all civilians. The targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure is unacceptable. Six, ensuring that humanitarian assistance reaches Gaza. Seven, the need for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. 8, the recommitment to a viable two-state solution in line with the parameters reflected in relevant UN Security Council resolutions. This can be the only viable solution to the problem, and it is clear that we have no other option but to create the conditions for the resumption of meaningful peace process. Dear friends, our region cannot afford to continue addressing its crisis in firefighting mode. What this crisis, the current crisis, as well as other crises have taught us is that there are no frozen conflicts. That in the absence of a viable, lasting peace, there is always the risk of erupting conflict with devastating consequences and ripple effects. In the vacuum created in the absence of fair and viable political solutions that address the root causes of conflicts, we will not see an end to the cycle of violence. The current conflict also presents a serious national security threat that cannot be overstated and should not be underestimated, particularly for the countries of the region. For example, Egypt and Jordan are shouldering enormous migratory burden. They cannot be expected to have more. Moreover, we fully understand and appreciate Egypt's legitimate real concerns because we know that Egypt is a catalyst of stability in our region and its security should not and cannot be jeopardized. We also share the fear that, as has often been the case in the past, our neighborhood will disproportionately bear the brunt of the consequences of this conflict. We cannot be expected to do that on our own. This is not a regional crisis of limited concern or impact. It is fundamentally a question of international peace and security and a challenge that our global collective security system must respond to. The Secretary General of the United Nations, whose presence here today I very much welcome, must be given space to contribute decisively to peacemaking in the Middle East and to contain the ramifications of this crisis. Our region cannot afford further instability. It is in dire need of peace, stability, and security. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our President, Nikos Christodoulides, and now I give the word to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
Your Excellency, President El-Sisi, Your Majesties, Your Highnesses, Excellencies. We meet in the heart of a region that is reeling in pain and one step from the precipice. A region where it is impossible not to be rocked to the core by heart-wrenching, soul-searing images of suffering. Yesterday, I went to the Rafah border crossing. There I saw a paradox, a humanitarian catastrophe playing out in real time. On the one hand, I saw hundreds of trucks teeming with food and other essential supplies. On the other hand, we know that just across the border, there are 2 million people without water, food, fuel, electricity, and medicine. Children, mothers, the elderly, the sick. Full trucks on one side, empty stomachs on the other. Those trucks need to move as quickly as possible in a massive, sustained and safe way from Egypt into Gaza. A 20-truck convoy of the Egyptian Red Crescent is moving today. And I want to express my deep gratitude to Egypt for the essential role Egypt is playing in this regard. But the people of Gaza need a commitment for much, much more. A continuous delivery of aid to Gaza at the scale that is needed. And we are working non-stop with all parties that are relevant to make it happen. Excellencies, let's be clear. The grievances of the Palestinian people are legitimate and long. We cannot and must not ignore the wider context for these tragic events. The long-standing conflict and 56 years of occupation with no end in sight. But nothing can justify the reprehensible assault by Hamas that terrorized Israeli civilians. And those abhorrent attacks can never justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. Institutional humanitarian law, including the Geneva Conventions, must be upheld. And that includes protecting civilians and not attacking hospitals, schools, and UN premises that are currently sheltering 500,000 people. Excellencies, our near-term goals must be clear. Immediate, unrestricted, and sustained humanitarian aid for besieged civilians in Gaza. Immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. And immediate and dedicated efforts to prevent the spread of violence which is increasing the risk of spillover. To advance all these efforts, I appeal for a humanitarian ceasefire now. Excellencies, our sustained collective efforts and resources have never been needed more. As we focus on ending the bloodshed, we cannot lose sight of the only realistic foundation for a true peace and stability, a two-state solution. Israelis must see their legitimate needs for security materialized, and Palestinians must see their legitimate aspirations for an independent state realized in line with United Nations resolutions, international law, and previous agreements. The time has come for action. Action to end this god-awful nightmare, and action to build a future worthy of the dreams of the children of Palestine, Israel, the region, and our world. Shukran.
Thank you, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. And now I give the word to His Excellency Charles Michel, Chairman of the European Council. May he proceed.
Royal, Mesdames et Messieurs les chefs d'État et de la paix et vous remercier pour votre décision d'inviter l'Union européenne ainsi que d'autres États membres de l'Union européenne. L'Union européenne est un projet politique qui a été fondé au siècle passé après la tragédie.
Of course, the entity of the European Union have been established after 2 world wars. The courage and the responsibility of the international community is what enabled us to establish this entity. Allow me to read to you the third item of the founding law for the European Union. Solidarity and peacekeeping and preserving human rights, especially child's rights, and full commitment to international law and right to self-determination for all nations were all included in the third item of the founding law for the European Union. This is the procedure taken by the European Union before any crisis, and that's what we must adopt. Of course, it's inspiring for all of us. In case of our stance, the European Council stance, before what we're witnessing right now, the terrorist attack that Hamas has conducted against Israel and Israelis is, of course, denounced and deplored, and we must gather all efforts possible for mediation in this conflict to stop this conflict. And of course, we must take all the possible paths in order to protect civilians, especially children. And hereby, we reiterate Israel's right to defend itself, but this must be included inside the framework of the international law. Mr. President, you enabled us to gather here today at one table to discuss and talk together about what we can do for these underprivileged people, what we can do to help them, to protect them, to provide them humanitarian aid, to supply them with water, food, power, medicine. And I believe that it's very important, of course, to cooperate with the Egyptian authorities to enable the Palestinian people to receive these aid. And I, once again, would like to assure that the European Union is keen on supporting these efforts to deliver these humanitarian aid to Palestinians, to the Palestinian people. It's our responsibility to work with strenuous efforts to avoid the spread of this conflict, to contain it, and to find common solutions between us. I think this is the prime goal of this meeting. Another point I would like to discuss with you, ladies and gentlemen, is the necessity of exerting all possible efforts to have a sustainable two-state solution. And that's, of course, the initiative that's adopted by many countries attending now. This initiative it's the initiative that gathered many countries together. All these countries attending today support the Palestinian Authority that represent the aspirations and demands, the legitimate demands of the Palestinian people. Of course, now we are in the context where Palestinians suffer from many difficulties. There are divisions, there are hardships, there are tensions, and our responsibility as an international community is to work together and try to establish peace and stability in the region. And of course, we abide by these rules and the respect for international law. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Charles Michel, Chairman of the European Council. And now I give the floor to Mr. Mohammed Waldeshi Ghazouani, His Excellency, President of Mauritania. May he proceed. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, Your Excellency, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, President of Egypt, Your Highnesses, Excellencies, Your Majesties, ladies and gentlemen. First, I extend thanks to Your Excellency President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi for your valuable initiative and inviting us today for this meeting in light of the current circumstances that the Palestinian people are going through right now and its serious repercussions on the region. The status quo in the region is catastrophic by all means, by all measures. And what unarmed civilians are facing contradicts all principles and values. It will always be in our minds. It's against the human innate, the destruction and the criminal activities practiced against humanity. We look here at the Baptist Hospital is one of the most horrific atrocities in this conflict. The continuation of this situation warns of a massive chaos in the entire Middle East region. Something that cannot be predicted will happen. The effects will be unprecedented. The negative repercussions will affect the entire Middle East region and the world. And the dangerous situation that we're going through makes us must stand to exert all efforts to find a solution, to find safe paths, safe corridors, to deliver the humanitarian aid necessary for them and for the return of the essential needs, for the essential services of water, food, fuel, and power. And we must find an immediate ceasefire solution to secure the humanity, rather to secure the stability, and of the region. What the region is witnessing right now, the violence, the catastrophes, is nothing but an inevitable result and a form, one form of the many forms of violence that poses a major threat to our security and stability. The Palestinians don't have the rights to establish an independent, sovereign Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. It is time now for everyone to be convinced that no one in this region will be safe or secured constantly unless the other side is secured. Peace is like security. You don't gain it by winning a battle or winning war. It will not be constant. It will not be stable for everyone. That's why we and the entire international society, community should be working with firmness to find a solution where we have two states, Israeli and Palestinian states, living side by side in peace and security. And the foundations for this solution exist in the resolutions, in legitimate solutions and the resolutions of the UN, and with initiatives like the Arab Initiative. And the region will not be safe without this. And I look forward to finding this summit having a solution, having a fruitful outcome for the solution, for the two-state solution. And I wish you all the best for all the activities of the summit. Thank you, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you. Thank you, Mr. President. Mohammed Ould Sheikh Al-Ghazouani, President of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania. And now I give the floor to His Highness Mishal Ahmed Al-Sabah, Crown Prince of Kuwait.
In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Your Excellency, President, and our dear brother, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the President of our sisterly country, Egypt. Your Majesties, Highnesses, and Excellencies, and estimated attendees, may God's peace and blessings be upon you all. At the outset, I would like to speak on behalf of His Majesty Sheikh Nawaf Al-Ahmad Al-Jabir Al-Sabah. May God bless and protect him. And it is my honor to extend to you his deepest greetings and his prayers for all of us to achieve the highest good for the entire region. And we would like to extend our deep gratitude to His Excellency, President Abdel Fattah Sisi, the President of Egypt, for convening this summit, which comes in the throes of exceptional developments that are extremely sad for the Palestinian people, and that have grave repercussions on the stability and security of not just the region, but the entire world. Your Majesties, Highnesses, and Excellencies, we follow with profound pain the escalation and the continuation of military operations executed by the Israeli forces against our brothers and sisters in the Gaza Strip, and the scene of collective punishment that they are going through. And they are doing through targeting innocent civilians through continuous aerial raids, which resulted in the killing of hundreds of innocent civilians, men, women, and children, indiscriminately. As well, the Israeli forces keep targeting the core services, fuel, power, water, and as well push civilians towards the path of forcible displacement. And it is no secret that these horrendous practices violate the provisions and the values and principles of the international law and the international conventions and the relevant international conventions. Majesties, Highnesses, and Excellencies, these practices are the outcome and the result of the inactivity of the international community to tackle this case effectively, and as well the result of the international community adopting and endorsing double standards when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And we, of course, in Kuwait, we condemn the murder of civilians and the detention of these civilians and taking them hostage. And we, as the government of Kuwait, we call for the instant termination and stopping of military operations and for the opening of safe corridors in order for the aid to be able to access the Gaza Strip. And of course, we express that we denounce and deplore wholeheartedly the act of forcible displacement that the Israeli forces are pushing the Palestinian people towards. And in the end, I would like to say that we in Kuwait, as the Kuwaiti people, the government, we affirm the right of the Palestinian people to have and to receive their legitimate rights. And we reaffirm the importance of establishing an independent sovereign Palestinian state in light of the 4th of June 1967 borders. And of course, we affirm our support for the Arab Peace Initiative and all the initiatives and all the relevant initiatives that ensure safety and security in the entire region. Thank you, Your Highness Mr. Mishal Ahmed al-Sabah, the Crown Prince of Kuwait. And I now call on Mr. Mohammed Menafi, the head of the presidential program or the presidential council from Libya. Sir, you have the floor. His Excellency, President of Egypt, President Abdel Fattah Sisi, head of the sisterly country Egypt. Excellencies, Highnesses, and Majesties, I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to our dear brother, President Abdel Fattah Sisi, and to the people and government of our sisterly country, Egypt, for their courageous initiative to convene this summit. Dear estimated attendees, we have to undertake our duties towards humanity in order to preserve the credibility of the international law and in order to ensure and instill international legitimacy. Ladies and gentlemen, what we are witnessing, which is represented by the targeting of whoever is living in the Gaza Strip, even if they take hostage in hospitals and churches and mosques, they still get targeted. Even, once more, I reiterate and say, even if they take refuge in mosques and churches, they still get targeted. We have to agree on formulation in order to stop and terminate the aggression on the Palestinian people. Since the Security Council has not been moving swiftly in order to stop the massacre and the crisis that is unfolding in Gaza. We have to do that in order to ensure and to affirm and activate the principles of the UN Charter, which preserves the value of the international humanitarian law and which is consistent with all other relevant laws. In fact, the Israeli forces are doing something that is completely inconsistent and violates the provisions of the international law and the international humanitarian law. Everything that the Israeli forces have been doing are unprecedented, atrocious acts that we are all witnessing in silence. And so we call for the instant stopping and termination of Israeli military operations in Gaza. And as well, we affirm that we are wholeheartedly against the incursion of Al-Aqsa Mosque and all mosques and churches and holy structures in the Eastern Jerusalem city. As well, we call for an Arab participation in the negotiations of comprehensive settlement that are going to predicate on the two-state solution and on the resolutions of international legitimacy in order for us to utilize them as a basis for settlement and for reaching an effective resolve for the issue. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not being accused of our preliminary stances regarding protecting civilians. We are not just accused of that, but we cannot at all disregard the suffering and the plight of the Palestinian people that are now put under complete siege and that are living in extreme despair. We need to find resolve for these Palestinian people to still have hope, to have hope once more. The human beings in the Gaza Strip, one of the most dense regions in the world in terms of the population, the Strip is collectively suffering from the acts of siege, and the practices of the occupation are still practicing arbitrariness and rejecting solutions and peace-oriented approaches. We are, ladies and gentlemen, before a real challenge that we have to live up to. We have to own up to our responsibilities in order to stop the plight and the suffering of our brothers and sisters in Palestine. In fact, there are there are agencies among which is the United Nations that has warned of the gravity of the situation in Palestine in the midst of targeting mosques, houses, churches, and hospitals. And according to the rule, and the hospitals right now, and according to the report of the WHO, are completely out of control. In fact, we would like to, in Libya, we would like to express that we are against unilateral decisions, and that we are against the forcible displacement of the Palestinian people into Sinai, and that we call for the continuation of the operation of the Rafah crossing under the supervision of Egypt. And as well, we call for the re-establishment of vital installations, institutions, and the reconstruction of vital infrastructure in the Gaza Strip, specifically after they got entirely demolished by the Israeli military machinery. We would like to express that we stand wholeheartedly with Egypt and our Arab brotherly countries against the liquidation, the attempt of the liquidation of the Palestinian cause. And from here, I would like to call on our colleagues in the Security Council and the United Nations agencies to undertake their responsibilities in order to find a resolve for the Palestinian issue. And President Abdel Fattah Sisi, once more, let me reiterate and say that I wholeheartedly thank you, and I thank our dear Majesties, Highnesses, and Excellencies, and the members of delegations for their keenness on participating in this very important international summit in order for all of us to protect our brothers and sisters in the Gaza Strip and to give them their self-determination right and to ensure their right for life. Thank you, Mr. Mohammed Al-Manfi, the head of the Presidential Council from the Republic of Libya. And now I give the floor to Mr. Boutros Sanchiz, the head of the Spanish government.
Thank you. At this critical moment when we are all still in shock from the ongoing spiral of violence and bloodshed, it is time for the international community to act boldly. Therefore, I would like to start by thanking President Al-Sisi for gathering us today in Cairo. This summit must be the first step towards restoring peace in the region and breaking this terrible cycle of violence. Spain's position is crystal clear, as reflected in the joint statement we, the European leaders, adopted last Sunday. We strongly condemn the terrorist attacks perpetrated against Israel, and we also recognize Israel's right to defend itself in strict compliance with international law and international humanitarian law. If the international community does not act, the situation can dramatically worsen. At this point in time, we need to focus both on what is urgent and on what is important. There are three priorities we must address urgently. First, we must protect the civilian population and guarantee humanitarian access to Gaza. That means sustainable and sizable humanitarian, and that meets the needs for the Palestinian population. Furthermore, I joined the UN Secretary General's call for a humanitarian ceasefire. Second, Hamas must release all hostages immediately and without conditions. We must ensure all hostages, including Israelis and other nationals, can return safely with their families. Third, we cannot let this conflict turn into a regional crisis. The situation is very volatile, and a small spark can start a wildfire. We must use all our political influence with all relevant actors to avoid an escalation of the conflict. At the same time, while we act upon what is urgent, we must act on what is important. And that means offering the Palestinian people, as well as the Israeli people, a credible prospect for peace, which must be the implementation of the two-state solution. Two states, Palestine and Israel, in peaceful and safe coexistence. For too many years, the international community thought we could live without paying too much attention to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Recent events have proved us wrong. Today, we cannot postpone a solution. The international community has demonstrated in the past that if there is political will, there is a future. The Madrid conference in 1991 and the Oslo agreements are good examples that we can bring hope. We must seize every opportunity to promote dialogue and peace. Dear colleagues, what we need today is to protect all civilians. I repeat, what we need today is to protect all civilians. Those who are kept hostage and need to be brought back with their families, and those who are suffering horror in Gaza. And the only way to achieve this is through more humanitarian aid and a humanitarian ceasefire. But at the same time, we must strive to set the building blocks for two states, Israel and Palestine, that respect each other and coexist in safety and peace. I sincerely wish that this summit will set the course for peace in the Middle East, peace that will ensure that the dramatic events that we are witnessing today won't happen again. Shukran.
أشكر معالي السيد.
Thank you, Your Excellency Pedro Sanchez, the Spanish government chief. And now I give the word to Kyriakos Mitsotakis, President of Greece.
Thank you, Excellencies. Let me start by thanking President Sisi for hosting this international conference aimed at addressing the current crisis in the Middle East. These are extraordinary times, and the situation in our common neighborhood is extremely grave. So it is right that we meet together here today. And in these critical moments for peace and stability in the region, I come here today as a true friend and as a neighbor. And the one key message to come out of today should be that we all condemn terrorism in all its forms, and we deplore the loss of life and the harm that has been inflicted to innocent civilians by the violence in Israel and in Gaza since the 7th of October terrorist attack by Hamas. There are innocent victims on both sides. There are civilians kept hostages, and no peace can be discussed until they are free. And there are civilians killed and wounded in horrible conditions, brutally assassinated in their homes in Israel, losing their lives in the destruction of the Al-Ahli hospital in Gaza. The position of Greece has been very clear from the beginning. Israel has a right of self-defense, but in accordance with international and humanitarian law. And I also want to be clear that collective punishment is prohibited by the laws of war. And these laws were designed to ensure that when war must be conducted, there are limits on what harm can be done to other human beings. And I will also share the opinion of the President of the European Council that a total siege is against international law. At the same time, we should also be honest in our judgment. Hamas is a terrorist organization that is inflicting unspeakable suffering both to Israelis but also to Palestinians. They should be held accountable. Hamas is not the Palestinian people, and we should not confuse the two. The Palestinian people do not deserve this. President Abbas, who heads the Palestinian Authority, rightly and bravely has spoken against violence from the very first day of the crisis. And it is very clear that the current situation poses grave risks of regional escalation. Egypt and Jordan are carrying a big burden and feel rightly very worried about the possibility of a forced displacement of the people of Gaza. And I'm here to support His Majesty King Abdullah, but also President Sisi, and to tell them that Greece stands with them. A widening of the conflict will have far-reaching consequences for the future of the entire region. And we should not underestimate the cost for all in terms of human lives and beyond. Our first thoughts these days must be with the victims, and we must recognize the pain and trauma that these attacks have brought both to Israeli and to Palestinian people and alleviate the sufferings. Hostages should be released and returned to their families, and the International Red Cross Cross should have access to them to start with, and the immediate and unhindered provision of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip should be ensured. And I want to emphasize the efforts of the Secretary General of the United Nations in this respect and welcome the announcement of the opening of a humanitarian corridor through Egypt to Gaza for the transport of the necessary provisions. And I hope that this can be put into effect immediately. Greece has been coordinating with our partners within the European Union. We are ready to contribute to any peace initiative, and as a neighboring country, we hope that an immediate de-escalation can be attained and humanitarian aid can be provided to all civilians. Last but not least, the future that we want for this region, the future of sustainable peace, stability, and prosperity can only be attained with the resumption of the peace process on the basis of a two-state solution. And if one thing should be clear to all of us is that no military intervention can replace a viable political solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Head of the Greek government, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, and now I give the word to Ms. Giorgia Meloni, Head of the Italian government.
La velocità, la determinazione con la
Thank you, Mr. President, for organizing this conference. We are talking about the attack launched by Hamas on October 7th, and we must always remember that innocent civilians have left their homes. And from our point of view, we must respond. Italy has taken many stances. We would like to be the starting dialogue point between Mediterranean countries and the European Union, and we have the ability to do that. This turning point that's shifting from leaving civilians, from our point of view, the displacement of civilians, especially, is one of our greatest concerns. It's very important for all the leaders who are present today and who are present at the negotiating table. What is happening in Gaza is not just a conflict, it's a regional conflict. It's a conflict for civilization. We must pay great attention to the humanitarian aid that must be delivered to the people of Gaza. And from my point of view, what must be done is there could possibly be a target here for the attack of Hamas. We must try to defend the Palestinian people. What is happening against the Palestinians in Gaza is a result through the countries of the Mediterranean and the Arab states. There must be peace for all the citizens, for all the people, and they defend themselves in Gaza. We are all we cannot overcome this. The deceit, but it's a main reason, and it's very important to have a peaceful dialogue. I believe that there are some important topics that we must discuss. Terrorism, for example, The the Islamic world and the entire Arab region is discussing this. Terrorism has weakened many states, especially Muslim countries, Muslim nations, the Islamic world. This is the choice of Hamas. They chose terrorism instead of dialogue and the terrorism against the Palestinian people. And the main cause for all this is something that is no one can kill children and women. We must face this. We must face this kind of killing. They should be able to defend themselves. The second point here to establish a state. This has not been easy. That's the point that we would like to address. It must be related to a political force against the civilian people. That's the end that we should face. I have great confidence in the Israeli people. The third point is we must stop and stand by the innocent children in that region. I consider this of diversity that has been done from this conference at this point something good. And I think that the decision of the European Union against Gaza, with the Italian aid, I say clearly that it must be bigger than this to deliver aid from the European Union and, of course, from Italy. I thank you very much for this. We are very concerned about this issue, about this topic regarding Hamas. You know there are some Italian hostages there in Gaza, and there are elderly people. It's very important to work together in Gaza. It's very important to control to de-escalate the tension in the region and control the repercussions. It will be something beyond imagination, and thus we must launch a political initiative that aims at finding a solution for the conflict in a sustainable way by respecting the two-state solution, a solution that can be applied on the short range. That's why there must be a sovereign Palestinian state that lives in peace side by side next to the Israeli state that has the right to exist and to live in peace and security and to self-defense. And Italy is ready to work on achieving all these points. Thank you very much. Thank you, Head of the Italian government, Ms. Giorgia Meloni. And now I give the floor to His Excellency Mohammed Shia Sudani, the Prime Minister of Iraq. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, Your Excellency, Brother Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, heads of government, kings and presidents, honorable attendees, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you. I extend thanks and gratitude to our sisterly country of Egypt for inviting us for this meeting in this very hard time when the Palestinian people are facing genocide and being targeted in hospitals, in civilian areas, in churches, on top of which is the massacre in the Baptist hospital that the Zionist occupation where the Zionist occupation has shown their real intent in crossing all the red lines. It's a war crime on full scale that started with killing unarmed people and forcing a siege on the rest of the living. It's extremely hard to describe in words what is happening on a daily basis, the atrocities that are committed non-stop, and the burying of people who are alive under the rubble of their own homes, starting from the Nakba in 1948. Gaza today is a test, a new test for the New World Order that have failed over and over and over in applying what they call for from human values, justice and freedom, and still Palestine stands witness to this failure. Honorable attendees, hasn't the time come yet to put an end to this occupation? Isn't it time for us to face what those Palestinian people are facing? They are being described as terrorists, while the atrocities and the crimes done by the occupation, by the Zionist occupation, their actions are described as defense according to international law. When will we admit that injustice never delivers peace, and there is no way in achieving peace and ending violence except after we overcome its reasons, on top of which come occupation and their discriminatory policies? The Zionist entity today continues to breach all laws, including war laws, which will affect international security and its sustainability, and it might even become bigger regionally, which threatens power supplies to international markets and also adds to the crises and the economic crisis and opens the door wide open to more deeper conflicts. And it's an ongoing in breaching the Geneva Convention, the third Geneva Convention on war prisoners, and the fourth convention that provides protection for civilians in occupied lands, alongside violating the International Convention on Civil Rights and the International Declaration for Human Rights, and more than 78 UN resolutions on the Palestinian cause. We are addressing the conscience of the world. We're saying that the Palestinian cause would never have reached this tragic situation if the international resolutions were respected, if international organizations have abided by their responsibilities and listened to a people who ask for nothing but gaining their legitimate rights in self-determination and in independence and sovereignty. Ladies and gentlemen, Iraq, the state of Iraq, refuses in all possible means all the attempts to empty the Gaza Strip from its people, and there is no way in talking about building camps or even any invitations that are outdated. There is no place for Palestinians except their land. And we here say again, we reiterate that there must be an immediate ceasefire and an opening for the safe corridors and allowing the delivery of humanitarian aid and relief, and then work on the safe passage of hostages. The efforts that we exert now must be for lifting the siege fully on Gaza Strip. Alongside that, we invite for establishing a fund for the reconstruction of Gaza, and we in the state of Iraq will never be late, will never refrain from delivering any aid and help to them. And before everything else, we here point to the importance of stop liquidating the cause of Palestine and trying to bury it. No one has the right to make any compromise or secede or donate or speak for the Palestinian people. They are the people who own the land and the cause. International legitimacy and all free nations of the world who believe in humanity and justice everywhere have called and still call for an independent state of Jerusalem, of Palestine, with East Jerusalem as its capital, not ripped through with policies. We must all realize that the continuation of neglecting the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people will never produce anything except more violence and more bloodshed and more instability in the region and the world. Mercy and acceptance for the martyrs of Gaza and all the martyrs of the Palestinian cause along the years, and may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you. Thank you, Mr. Mohammed Mishal al-Sudani, government. And now I give the word to His Excellency Shihab bin Tariq, Deputy Prime Minister of the Sultanate of Oman.
In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Your Excellency, President Abdel Fattah Sisi, President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, our sisterly country. Your Majesties, Excellencies, and Highnesses, heads of delegations, estimated attendees, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon you all. At the outset, I would like to extend to you the deep greetings of His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq, the Sultan of Oman, and his deep wishes for this international summit to become a success. Today, and in the throes of a severe crisis that the region is witnessing, we are convening. We witness the murdering of innocent civilians, hundreds and hundreds of innocent civilians, the demolishing of vital infrastructure, water infrastructure, electricity and power, and medical aid. The Sultanate of Oman rejects and deplores wholeheartedly this military escalation on Palestine, and we call on the international community to terminate this war and to go back to the path of wisdom and safety in order for us to achieve comprehensive peace and security in light of the international law. Majesties, Highnesses, and Excellencies, heads of delegations, dear attendees. His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq, the Sultan of Oman, and his government, they affirm their support to international efforts aiming to stop bloodshed instantly and to ensure the delivery of humanitarian relief and urgent medical aid and food for the victims in the Gaza Strip, and the restoration of the water and power services in the Strip. And His Majesty affirms and calls on international officials to work diligently in order to instantly stop ceasefire and to find a resolve for this cause. In fact, we call for the international law and the international humanitarian law to be put into effect. And we call on the United Nations to carry out its responsibilities in order to stop the waves of violence and torture in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. Since we can't actually think that peace and security are going to be prevailing in the region without the Palestinian people receiving their right in establishing a sovereign, independent state, in consistency with the 1967 borders and in consistency with the Security Council resolutions and the General Assembly provisions of the United Nations. And in the end, I would like to reiterate and extend our deep gratitude to our sisterly country, Egypt, for convening this very important summit. And we thank you for your warm hospitality. Of course, justice is a legitimate right for all humanity, and we affirm that as the Sultanate of Oman. And may God's peace and blessings be upon you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Your Highness, Mr. Shihab, Your Excellency, Mr. Shihab bin Sayed, the Deputy Minister. And now I call on Mr. Ahmed Abul Ghait, the Secretary General of the League of Arab States. Your Excellency, President Abdel Fattah Sisi, this conference convenes in the throes of great escalation of the Israeli war waged on the Gaza Strip. And because of the gravity of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, I would like to say that the international community needs to work on two pathways in parallel. First, the instant ceasefire and putting a limit to the atrocious bombing of the civilians of the Gaza Strip. And number two, opening a safe corridor in order to deliver humanitarian relief aid for the population in the Gaza Strip while securing the supplies of food, water, and power to the population of the Gaza Strip. This is our pivotal priority. However, the continuation of the status quo actually gets into the framework of a blatant violation of the international humanitarian law practiced by the end of Israel, which is the force of occupation. And I would like to reiterate and say and affirm that the League of Arab States condemns and denounces and rejects altogether the attack on innocent civilians, and that civilians are all alike and are all equal, and all human souls have their or are sacred. And I would like to denounce that there are certain acts that are called by some international community forces as barbaric, and others are actually called a sophisticated means of self-defense. We condemn and deplore that altogether. I would like as well to call on all the parties that are not involved in the conflict directly to bear the responsibility and to practice self-control and to not open the door for any practice that could aggravate the conflict even further. In fact, I call on these parties to avert a regional war that could break out in the region by practicing wisdom. And all forces, main international forces, need to agree right away on a comprehensive political resolve that ensures that the Palestinian people are granted a sovereign independent state in order for the Palestinian people to live in peace and security, just like all their counterparts in the world. This resolve, this settlement alone is the mechanism that is going to help the upcoming generations in Palestine to avoid more and more wages and atrocities of war. Thank you, Mr. Ahmed Abul Ghait, for your address. And I now call on the head of the African Union to proceed with his address.
فخامة السيد عبد الفتاح السيسي رئيس جمهورية مصر العربية
أصحاب الجلالة والسمو والفخامة رؤساء
Your Excellency, President of Egypt, representatives of governments and states, representatives of international organizations, dear ministries, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to extend my deepest thanks and gratitude to His Excellency President Abdel Fattah Sisi for convening this urgent meeting that is of pivotal importance. And I would like to thank him wholeheartedly, and as well the Egyptian people and government for their warm hospitality and their grand reception, specifically in the midst of the opening of this summit. Majesties, Highnesses, and Excellencies, allow me to actually trespass some of the protocol rules. And let me say that this atrocious war waged on Gaza and its repercussions, which entail comprehensive demolishment of all infrastructure in the Gaza Strip, and which involves the murdering of innocent civilians. This is a circumstance, allow me to say, that actually relieves us all speechless. There is nothing that we can do other than embodying and practicing the best response. We have called for an instant ceasefire at the African Union. We have called for the delivery of humanitarian relief aid, and we have as well called on all parties of international community to undertake the responsibilities in this regard. And we would like to call for the instant release of hostages, specifically those hostages that are women and children. And we appraise the efforts of Qatar in this regard, and we hope that their efforts are culminated with success in terms of releasing hostages. However, with regards to the roots of the conflict, allow me to say, frankly, that we call for the establishment of an open international front that aims to stop all sorts of violence practiced against civilians, and based on fixed principles and international instruments, we affirm that the current war and the tight international crisis which is unfolding in the entire region is a crisis that we need to come out of with an effective resolution that ensures that there is a coexistence of two states coexisting together in peace, a state of Israel and a state of Palestine, two states that have shared benefits and have shared interests that ensure the well-being of their peoples and the peoples of the region. We perceive that any other approach will hinder any attempt for achieving peace in the region. This region that is highly sensitive. And in this context, we would like to express that the African Union is more than ready to support all of your efforts in order to create the international leap required. We would like to express that the values of equality and justice and international peace and the reference of humanitarian morality and ethics excerpted from all religions and traditions actually requires us all to take a quantum leap in order to get out of this crisis. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Moussa Faqih, and thank you for the African Union for their address. And I would like to call now on His Excellency Mr. Faisal bin Farhan, the Saudi Foreign Minister. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate,
Your Majesties, Excellencies, all the presidents attending and kings, may the peace and blessings and mercy of Allah be upon you. First, I would like to extend thanks to His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, and the Egyptian government for their responsibility towards what we're witnessing right now in Gaza Strip. And I deliver the greetings of custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman, and his Crown Prince, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and we wish you all the success for the activities of this conference, of this summit. The tragic incidents that are currently happening in Palestine require us to put an immediate halt to what's happening there in Palestine and to provide civilian protection for them and to release all the hostages captivated there according to international law and to find a peaceful solution to this crisis so that the region might come out of the vicious circle of constant violence and to have peaceful, sustainable peace and stability. We affirm our refusal to the violations of international human law from any party and under any pretext, and we deplore any targeting for civilians, whoever they are, and call upon the international community to take a firm stance to commit Israel to respect human rights, and we refuse the double standards practiced by some in the international community, and here we can't say enough. There must be an action. We call upon the international community to stress on the Israeli side to lift their siege and halt their military operations that have led to the killing of many innocent victims and have severe repercussions on international and regional peace and stability. And we refuse all the attempts to forced displacement on Palestinians, and here we express our deep concern about the international community and how they're unable to take a stance toward this crisis. Your Majesties, Highnesses, Excellencies, we also call for the immediate open of all safe corridors and the evacuation of all the injured and the delivery of all humanitarian aid and medical aid to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinians. And we reaffirm that the Saudi Kingdom is resorting to the option of peace and to help the Palestinians establish their independent sovereign state on Palestinian lands based on June 4th, 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital according to international laws. Honorable attendees, the Kingdom was keen from the beginning to convene and to consult with our brothers and sisterly countries to move firmly and call upon the international community to find a solution to end this crisis and allows us to go out of this dark tunnel towards a brighter future for the Palestinian cause and call upon the international community to seek a sustainable peace in the entire region for the prosperity of all. The Kingdom will keep its stances with all its partners, but the most important thing for us is the immediate halt for the military escalation to save people and to deliver aid for them and to work further for peace. And may the peace and blessings and mercy of Allah be upon you. Thank you, Your Highness Prince Faisal bin Farhan, Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia, for his speech. And now I call upon Mr. Hakan Fidan, Foreign Minister of Turkey, to deliver his speech. May he proceed.
Dear colleagues, Excellencies, this is a crucial juncture where bloodshed prevails over restraint and common sense. Last couple of weeks have already left an indelible mark in our minds. Many of us still find it difficult to believe what has been unfolding. Thousands of innocent civilians are losing their lives in front of our eyes. The situation in Palestine has always been a tragedy. Now it is turning into carnage. There can be no excuse or reason for inflicting such a collective and cruel suffering on human lives, like the one happening in Gaza. We must be unequivocal in condemning and resisting loss of any single innocent life. The international community has to calibrate its actions and messages at this highly critical point. Israel should be urged that the temporary so-called victories did not bring long-term security in the course of history. It will not bring this time too. Israel exploits the solidarity of some countries as an open check for unleashing a blind rage on Palestinians, such a rage which even targets mosques and hospitals. On the other hand, I would like to remind that unconditional military aid to Israel or coercing regional countries to unrealistic and unsustainable plans serve nothing but deepening occupation. Because these policies omit, neglect, and ignore a vital part of the equation, the Palestinians. Insistence on such errors are in fact another sign that the current international order cannot produce solution to core problems. What this order produces is only erosion of universal values and distortion of facts on the ground. Up until now, Israel took advantage of this systemic failure. Israel distorts the sanctity of Masjid al-Aqsa and the status quo of the Muslim and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem, but brands it as religious tolerance. Israel grabs the lands, homes, and livelihoods of Palestinians in East Jerusalem and West Bank, but brands it as civilian settlements. Israel imprisons 2 million people in Gaza's narrow strip, unfit for decent human life, but calls it as a protection against terrorism. By dehumanizing Palestinian lives, Israel aims to normalize Palestinian suffering. We say never. Never for Palestinians, never for anybody else. If allowed, this crisis can spark wars of global scale through geographical escalation. But it can also serve as a ground for a just and lasting peace. Therefore, at this historic juncture, we have to set the track right. Turkey believes that a right track begins with the cessation of hostilities and unconditional humanitarian aid to Gaza. Simultaneously, we have to revitalize every effort to return to a peace process based on a two-state solution. An independent, sovereign, and contiguous state of Palestine along 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital is not only a must for peace, it is also the strategic imperative for international security and stability. I am sure we all agree on this. However, it is not enough. We have to go beyond agreeing and start implementing this vision. Furthermore, there should be a guarantee mechanism for monitoring, verifying, when needed, and enforcing obligations of the parties in a just peace. Turkey remains ready to further develop this concept and share the responsibility for creating a dignified, just, and secure future for all. Our heartfelt gratitude goes to Egypt for this timely gathering. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hakan Fidan, Turkish Foreign Minister, for his speech. And now I ask Mr. Mauro Ferreira, Brazilian Foreign Minister, to deliver a speech. May he proceed.
President Abdul Fattah al-Sisi, President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, Majesties, Highnesses, heads of states, government, ministers, and heads of delegations. The world is following with anxiety and hope the Cairo Peace Conference today. I, therefore, congratulate the Egyptian government for its efforts in organizing the summit expeditiously. The mission President Lula da Silva conferred to me while instructing me to attend this meeting on his behalf was unambiguous: to add Brazil's voice to all those who are urging calm, restraint, and peace in the region. Brazil has been following with concern the escalation of violence and deterioration of the situation in the region recently and over the past months. We regret to witness such conditions in the year of the 30th anniversary of the Oslo Accords. Had we seen progress ever since, we would be celebrating peace and friendship. Yet the situation before us today is very dire. The Brazilian government unequivocally rejects and condemns the terrorist attacks by Hamas in Israel on September 7th, as well as the taking of civilian hostages. Brazilian nationals are among the victims. 3 of them were murdered in Israel. Like many other countries, Brazil also has citizens waiting to be evacuated from Gaza, while we watch with alarm the deteriorating humanitarian situation in the region, especially the shortage of medical supplies, food, water, electricity, and fuel. Israel, as the occupying power, has specific responsibilities under international humanitarian rights and humanitarian law. These must be complied with under any circumstance. Over the past decade, we have witnessed no winners in this protracted conflict. The civilian population remains the main victim of the lack of dialogue and ever-growing resentment. The stalemate in the peace process, the social and economic stagnation that has long prevailed in Gaza, the ongoing expansion of Israeli settlements in the occupied territories, the violence against civilians, the destruction of basic infrastructure, violations of the historic status quo of holy sites in Jerusalem. All these factors combine to generate a social and cultural environment that jeopardizes the two-state solution and engenders hatred, violence, and extremism. Excellencies, the ongoing tragic situation in the Gaza Strip is of paramount concern. Whereas there always will be those willing to add fuel to the fire, Brazil will urge for dialogue. The destruction of civilian infrastructure, including healthcare facilities, is unacceptable. We witnessed with dismay the bombing of Al Ali Arab Hospital, deeply regret and mourn the hundreds of civilian casualties, including patients, doctors, nurses, and other humanitarian workers. All parties must fully protect civilians and respect international law and international humanitarian law. The international community must exert maximum diplomatic effort in order to ensure the swift establishment of humanitarian corridors and pauses and immediate ceasefire. As stated by President Lula, the current crisis requires an urgent multilateral humanitarian action to end the suffering of civilians caught up in the midst of hostilities. As President of the United Nations Security Council for the month of October, Brazil has convened emergency sessions and fostered dialogue. Despite such efforts, the Security Council was regrettably unable to adopt a resolution on October 18th. Nevertheless, the many favorable votes the draft resolution received, 12 out of 15 votes, are evidence of wide political support for speedy action by the Council. We believe this view is shared by the international community at large. Let me be clear, there is a broad political call for the opening of urgently needed humanitarian pauses, the establishment of humanitarian corridors, and the protection of humanitarian personnel. We must find ways to unlock multilateral action. Brazil will spare no effort in this regard. On October 24th, I will chair the United Nations Security Council's quarterly open debate on the situation of the Middle East, including the question of Palestine. I would suggest that we continue this conversation there at the highest possible level in an attempt to keep searching for consensus for immediate action. The paralysis of the Security Council is having detrimental consequences for the security and lives of millions. This is not in the interest of the international community. We must also strive to avoid any possibility of regional spillover of the conflict. Further down the road, we must find ways to revitalize the peace process, to advance political negotiation towards a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in the Middle East, Simply managing the conflict is not an acceptable alternative. Only the resumption of effective negotiations can bring concrete results towards the implementation of the two-state solution in accordance with all relevant General Assembly and Security Council resolutions, with Israel and Palestine living in peace and security within agreed and internationally recognized borders. Brazil is ready and willing to support all efforts to this end. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mauro Vieira, Brazilian Foreign Minister, and now I ask upon Mr. Nasser, Moroccan Foreign Minister, to deliver his speech. Thank you, Your Excellency, Your Majesties, Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. In the beginning, I would like to deliver the greetings of His Majesty King Mohammed VI and his extended thanks for the convening of this very important summit and his deep appreciation for the good efforts made by Your Excellency for the stability and security of the region. The Moroccan Kingdom, led by His Majesty, Chairman of the Jerusalem Committee, wishes that this summit might send 5 important messages to the international community. First, an invitation to de-escalation and protect enough bloodshed and to stop criminal activities, and for the region to avoid further escalation which might undermine the efforts for peace and stability. Second, the dire need to protect civilians and not targeting them according to principles of international law and the Islamic international law and shared human values. Third, the necessity to allow the delivery of humanitarian aid easily, smoothly, and abundantly to the residents of Gaza Strip, because the humanitarian status there is unbearable. Fourth, refusal of all ideas aiming at the displacement of Palestinians from the land and stabilizing the regional security of neighboring countries. Fifth, to launch a real peace operation aiming at the two-state solution, one Palestinian state based on the June 4th, 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital, living side by side with Israel. The Moroccan Kingdom, led by His Majesty, commits to peace, the option of peace, and to more progress and prosperity for the entire region, and today willing to coordinate and to cooperate with all the partners concerned to work towards halting the hostilities. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Nasser Berita, Foreign Minister of Morocco, for his speech, and I ask upon Ms. Catherine Colonna, the Foreign Minister of France, to deliver her speech. May she proceed.
Majesties, Highnesses, Excellencies, heads of governments, dear ladies and gentlemen, on the 7th of October, actually, Palestine was bombed. Israel was hit by a terrorist group that does not represent the Palestinian people, that is driven by hatred and violence. In fact, the magnitude of the atrocities that are practiced by this group are barbaric and have left a great negative impact on the region. And in France, 2 persons have died and 7 have been missing or taken hostage because of a terrorist operation that took place in France as well, and because of that, we call for the instant release of all hostages. There is nothing at all that justifies terrorism, and Israel has the right to defend itself in order for this not to ever be replicated again. And for the response of Israel to be strong, it has to be just, and for it to be just, it has to be consistent with the international law and international instruments, and we have to remind you here that the law applies to everyone indiscriminately. And so the President of France has reminded the Prime Minister of Israel of this, and I remind you all of this fact as well. And Israel has the right to actually release a response and to respond to the terrorist attack that it suffered from, but as well Israel has to abide by the international law provisions in order to protect civilians, because these civilians are not responsible for the acts of the group of terrorists. And the terrorists of Hamas, they do not represent the Palestinian cause by any stretch of the imagination. And we would as well, we would like to express that we reject the act of Hamas, and that we call on all other international parties to as well condemn the act of Hamas. We have been condemning terrorism now, today, and forever, and definitely will keep on supporting the Palestinian leadership. We have done that always as France. In fact, last week I have announced an aid of 10 million euros that are the IFRC and the Red Crescent agencies. And in fact, this was among our very prominent efforts. And in fact, the President has announced and has appropriated an additional 10 million euros and appropriated them for relieving and for supporting the Palestinian people. And these are our efforts, and we as well appraise the other efforts exerted by Egypt and the United Nations. And we have to reach a consensus on how the aid is going to be delivered to Palestine in a sustainable manner. In fact, this morning we have expressed our appraisal for these efforts, and the humanitarian relief has to target the most vulnerable sectors in terms of the humanitarian situation. And of course, that means that there has to be a ceasefire, and that those who wish to exit the Gaza Strip need to be allowed to do that without any impediment. And in fact, the situation is pressing in terms of the humanitarian crisis unfolding there, and there is this is no secret, and it's no secret as well that the Palestinian people wish to live in peace and coexist in peace next to the Israeli people. And we actually, at France, we have a steadfast stance, and we affirm our stance today. We support a two-state solution, a state for Israel and an independent sovereign state for Palestine, two states that coexist in peace. Our responsibility revolves around reaching a consensus around these principles in order for this wound to heal in the Middle East finally. And in fact, it is pivotally important as well for us to avert more escalation in the region. There are forces that actually try to add more fuel to the fire and that try to execute their agenda of dominance and domineering in the region. This is a trap that we all have to avert. And we should as well bear our collective responsibility in order for us to place ourselves once more on the path of sustainable peace. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Catherine Colonna, Ms. Catherine Colonna, the Foreign Minister of France. And I now call on the Foreign Minister of Canada.
أشكرك السيد الرئيس عبد الفتاح السيسي اللي جمعنا معا في هذا الاجتماع.
International development, let me begin by saying that Canada stands with you, and we appreciate Egypt's leadership in working to support peace for both Israelis and Palestinians. Like all of you, we're gravely concerned by the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, which continues to deteriorate. We're encouraged by the news this morning about food, fuel, and water being able to enter Gaza, but we need to see more. Rapid and unimpeded humanitarian access must be facilitated to allow essential humanitarian relief for civilians in need. Last week, in response to the urgent needs stemming from the crisis in Israel, West Bank, and Gaza, Minister Hussein announced himself an initial $10 million in humanitarian assistance. And today, in the spirit of your initiative, President, Canada is announcing $50 million more to support humanitarian partners, including UN agencies in the region, in order for them to be able to provide urgent and life-saving support. Donc, au nom du Canada, aujourd'hui, nous avons 50 millions de plus en aide humanitaire pour soutenir différentes organisations, notamment des organisations des Nations Unies, pour aider la région. And none of this funding will go to Hamas. Because even in times of crisis, there are principles, and even in times of war, there are rules. And Canada stands for the fact that at all times, all parties in conflict must respect international humanitarian law. Palestinians and Israeli civilians are equal, and both must be protected. They deserve to live in peace and security, with dignity and without fear, just as people the world over do. Canada unequivocally condemns Hamas terrorist attacks against Israel. At this point, we mourn 6 deaths and waiting for 2 missing. Canada is clear. We support Israel's right to self-defense in accordance with international law. And we continue to demand that Hamas releases all hostages and that hostages be treated humanly as international law indicates. 400 Canadians in Gaza must be also able to come back home. Just as it is critical that we stand united in support of peace for both Israeli and Palestinians, it is also essential that this conflict does not escalate or spread to the region. And I know many of us have said this today. And in this respect, Iran's rhetoric in support of Hamas is deeply troubling. And we're gravely concerned by Iran's continued actions and the actions of its proxies to destabilize peace and security across the Middle East. In the fog of war, it is always hard to see the light on the horizon, but we need to see it. We should not be scared about talking about the next steps. Canada will always stand up for human rights. We'll always stand up for rights of civilians to be protected. And we'll always stand up to ensure that human dignity is upheld. Today, I'm reaffirming our commitment to Palestinians' right to self-determination, which includes a 2-state solution, where Israelis and Palestinians can live together in dignity, peace, security, side by side. More than ever, I'm committed to working with all of you to create the political horizon that is vital in achieving this vision. Nous ne devons jamais oublier la solution à 2 États.
We seek for achieving peace, security, and dignity for all peoples of the world. Thank you, Ms. Melanjolie. The Foreign Minister of Canada, I now call Ms. Labina, the Foreign Minister of Germany.
Thank you for gathering us here in Egypt. An Israeli father whose eyes are sore of crying, whose wife and 2 little daughters have been brutally abducted by Hamas terrorists. A mother in Gaza who is desperate with sorrow because she can't find drinking water for her little baby, fearing that the violence will cost more victims for other family members. A family in Lebanon who is worried about the violence escalating to her country. Across the region, we see terrible human grief and fear. And let me be very clear, there is no doubt. All civilian lives matter just the same. And let me be also clear, the cause of all the suffering of these past weeks, the suffering that brings us here today, the suffering of the little girls, the mother, the families, have a name. It was Hamas that brought horrendous terror over Israel on October 7th, committing atrocious crimes. Like any other country in the world, Israel has a right to defend itself and to protect its people against this terror within the framework of international law. That's why the German government firmly stands in solidarity with Israel. For Germany, the security of the state of Israel is non-negotiable. What is also clear is that the perpetrators of this terror do not speak for the Palestinian people. They speak only for themselves. They speak the language of terror. The Palestinian mothers and fathers in Gaza, struggling to find drinking water for their children, do not speak the language of terror. Their brothers and sisters in the West Bank, in Jordan or in Lebanon, who are afraid of regional escalation, do not speak that language of terror. We, here in this room, do not speak that language. We speak the language of international law, of humanity, of peaceful coexistence. That's what unites us. In this sense, I appeal to everyone to stand up against terrorism. I appeal to everyone to distinguish between terrorists and the civilian population at all times. And I appeal to everyone to not fan the flames of hatred, because that is exactly what Hamas and their sponsors want: to risk further regional escalation, to divide us. This terrorist plan must not play out. That is why the fight against Hamas must be carried out with the greatest possible consideration for the humanitarian situation, for the innocent men, women, and children in Gaza. That is also why we must not now jointly step up our efforts to help those most in need. Germany has increased its humanitarian aid to Gaza by 50 million euros. We encourage all others, including from the region, to join this cause, as some have already announced to do so. It is crucial stepping up our humanitarian goods. It is crucial that humanitarian goods can now go into Gaza via Rafah. And I would like to thank you, the Egyptian government and US partners, as well as the United Nations, for your efforts in this. But we know that more help will be needed to alleviate the suffering. And I'm glad that here in this room, we agree that ultimately this region needs a new peace process that will allow both Israelis and Palestinians to live peacefully and securely side by side in the two independent states. This may sound far away today, but only a just and lasting solution would also mean the ultimate defeat of Hamas and its playbook, which is based on a complete rejection of humanity, of diplomacy. The abducted Israeli girls, the fathers in Gaza, the families in Lebanon, they need us now. They need us, the international community, to speak the language of humanity. Shukran.
شكرا للسيدة.
I now call on Mr. Espen Parth Idi, the Foreign Minister of Norway. Sir, you have the floor.
Heads of state, heads of government, excellencies, thank you so much to Egypt and President El-Sisi for convening us here and this crucially important moment. I think we're all here recognizing that we're in the midst of a very deep crisis. It's a crisis in Gaza, it's a crisis for Israel and Palestine, it's a crisis for the entire region, and it threatens to become a crisis for the entire world. That's why we are all here, that's why we care, that's why we need to be very clear. We have condemned the heinous attacks by Hamas on Israeli civilians. We condemned the announcement of a full blockade, a full siege of Gaza. We deplore the loss of life, innocent life, wherever it happens, and we're deeply worried by all the news we're receiving about the terrible humanitarian conditions inside Gaza right now. Save the Children informs us that a child is dying every quarter of an hour inside Gaza. This cannot go on. Water, electricity, food, medicine has been cut off. I am glad to see that 20 trucks came into Gaza this morning, and I would like to commend everybody who contributed to that, but it's a very, very, very small start. It's a very small start. We need much, much more. Humanitarian access has to be rapid, it has to be safe, it has to be unhindered, and it has to be regular in order to be helpful. We join the call, Norway joins the call for a humanitarian pause to facilitate that. And we remind everyone that pause or not, there is a constant obligation by warring parties to make sure that civilian populations are able to uphold bare necessities of life, even in the midst of war. Right now, the immediate need is to restore the access of water and electricity to Gaza. Last week, we announced the contribution of 70 million Norwegian kroner to humanitarian activities in Gaza, and I'm happy to announce today an additional 60 million Norwegian kroner will be dedicated to UNRWA for their indispensable work in Gaza. So we need to address the immediate humanitarian situation. However, that's not the solution. The solution has to be political, again. And I very much agree with what King Abdullah said at the beginning of this round of speeches, that we all know that at the end of the day, it's best for Palestinians, it's best for Israelis, it's best for everybody that we actually come to establish a two-state solution, one for Israelis, one for Palestinians. Norway's been committed to that for more than 30 years, and for 3 decades we have been chairing the donor committee, the HALC. We continue to do so, but I want to share with you that we often have felt that this has been very much a process that have been upholding a status quo, and people have been confusing a non-solution that was barely maintained for a real solution. That was wrong. We have also seen good signs of constructive rapprochement between some of the states in the region, some of the Arab states in the region and Israel. But we need to remind everybody that there must be a space for the Palestinian population and the Palestinian institutions in those solutions. So I think that it's time now, as we move out of the rubble of this terrible crisis, as we have hopefully managed to deter a further escalation, we need to go back to the table, go back to address the key issues, the key parameters of the two-state solution. We need to reinvigorate, we need to renew, maybe to restart, and we need to allow ourselves to think outside of the box, not on where we want to go, which is a two-state solution for Palestinians and Israelis, but how we do it, how we approach it. And I want to say, this is not the time to cut the support for the Palestinian authorities. A lot of people are deploring the activities of Hamas for very, very good reason. But if we, on top of that, make it less possible to maintain the bare institutions of statehood under the Palestinian authorities' purview, this will not work. The whole idea of Oslo was to start building the institutions of a state bottom up, but only for the purpose of fulfilling a political horizon further on. So the purpose was the statehood, and the instrument was building institutions bottom up. We started doing that, and a lot of us have spent quite a number of resources, political capital and money on exactly that, but the political horizon faded away. And without the political horizon, this simply does not make sense. So out of this, today we meet about the acute humanitarian crisis, and we need to address that in Gaza right now, as is being done. And I agree with much that has been said on that specific issue, but it's just in the middle of conflict, in the middle of a downward spiral, that we need to start thinking of what happens later. And Norway remains committed, as we have been for the last 3 decades, and we stand ready to work with you to try to find that solution. Thank you. Shukran.
Thank you, Mr. Espen, Foreign Minister of Norway, for your address. And I now call on Ms. Oko Kamikawa, the Foreign Minister of Japan.
As the situation surrounding Israel and Palestine is growing tense, it is indeed opportune to hold this conference. I'd like to pay our greatest tribute to President al-Sisi for his strong leadership. Japan once again unequivocally condemns the terror attacks committed by Hamas and others on October 7th. The international community should never tolerate such a heinous act. Japan's position on this issue is consistent. We put great importance to the following 3 points. Firstly, immediate release of hostages and securing safety of civilians. Secondly, all parties need to act in accordance with international law. And thirdly, calming down the situation as soon as possible. We need to redouble our diplomatic effort in order to prevent the instability from spilling over in the region and to calm down the situation as soon as possible. Japan has had close consultations with regional key players such as Palestine, Israel, Arab states, and Iran. On October 17th, I hosted the G7 Foreign Ministers teleconference as a chair of G7. Especially the most imminent challenge now is to minimize the deterioration of the humanitarian situation. More than 1 million innocent people in Gaza Strip are in an extremely dire condition. The supply of food, water, and electricity is about to run out. There are 2 things we need to work on now. Firstly, we need to deliver necessary assistance to the people in the Gaza Strip as early as possible. Secondly, it is imperative to realize evacuation of foreign citizens who still remain in the Gaza Strip. Those foreign citizens are all friends of Palestine. Also, Japan has already announced emergency humanitarian assistance worth $10 million in total for the people in the Gaza Strip. It is the first shot of assistance Japan is planning, and we will keep on considering assistance based on the needs on the ground in a timely manner. In this context, I would like to stress the importance of actual delivery of humanitarian goods to each person. To this end, Egypt plays a key role. I hear that trucks carrying humanitarian aid entered the Gaza Strip this morning for the first time since the beginning of the current situation. Japan welcomed this as a positive development towards improving the humanitarian situation on the ground and pay deep respect to those who have worked hard to make it happen. In close cooperation with Egypt, other countries and international organizations, we will make our utmost effort so that the humanitarian goods will be delivered as soon as possible. Now, I would like to touch upon the mid to long-term vision. As I mentioned earlier, the terror attacks by Hamas and others should be categorically denied. At the same time, it is also a sad reality that we hear voices of people in part of the world that praise such an act. It is a reminder of people's exasperation at the still bleak prospect of the Middle East peace process that has worked for the past 30 years. We must not let the tragedy we are witnessing now shut the windows of peace opportunity for Middle East peace. Only through dialogue can we solve this issue. Japan's position to support a two-state solution is unwavering. For decades, Japan has been supporting confidence building and economic self-reliance of Palestine, which serve as a foundation of the peace process. Japan's firm commitment for Palestine will never change, as you can see in our assistance for UNRWA that has surpassed $1 billion in total, as well as a Jericho Agro-Industrial Park project under the Corridor of Peace and Prosperity initiatives. This is a critical moment. Let us share our grand vision to pursue the world in harmony, not division or confrontation. Let us put together our capacity and wisdom to ensure safety for civilians, to calm down the situation and make sure that people in the region can enjoy sustainable peace and security. Shukran jazilan wassalam alaikum. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Yuku, the Foreign Minister of Japan, and I now call on Mr. James Clarley, the Foreign Minister of the United Kingdom. I call on him to take the floor.
Mr. President, for convening this incredibly important meeting at this difficult time. I am sure we all share the revulsion at Hamas's murderous acts of terrorism, the targeting of the civilians, the murdering of children, the desecration of dead bodies. And I'm sure we are all distressed by the plight of Palestinian civilians in Gaza, whose lives have been made harder, more painful, and more dangerous because of the brutal attacks by Hamas on the 7th of October. And we all mourn the dead, both Israeli and Palestinian. This has been an issue which has long stimulated passions, and we are now all seeing on social media and in our communities how divisive and polarizing the current situation has become. So we have a duty to work together to prevent instability from engulfing the region and claiming yet more lives. We must work together to prevent the tragic situation in Gaza becoming a regional conflict, because that is exactly what Hamas wants. We remind ourselves that just months ago, the Negev summit was a moment of hope for peaceful coexistence between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Hamas has long stood in direct opposition to that vision, and we must therefore ensure that Hamas does not win. Rather, we must ensure that peaceful coexistence wins. The UK notes the thoughtful and calm words of President Abbas on behalf of the Palestinian people. And we are grateful to the governments who are seeking to intercede on behalf of those held hostage and those foreign nationals who are trapped in Gaza. And we are grateful for the work to ensure that the humanitarian aid which many of us have partially funded, reaches those Gazans who are deeply in need. The UK is clear and has been consistently clear that Israel has the right to self-defense and the right to secure the release of those who were kidnapped on the 7th of October. And we are also clear that we must work, and they must work, to alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza, and that their actions are in accordance with international law. I have spoken directly to the Israeli government about their duty to respect international law and the importance of preserving civilian lives in Gaza. Despite the incredibly difficult circumstances, I have called for discipline and professionalism and restraint from the Israeli military. The situation currently unfolding is probably the most challenging situation that I have had to deal with in my professional, personal, or political life. And I suspect that I am not alone. But I still believe in the power of diplomacy, and I still believe that we can work together to secure a future where Israelis and Palestinians live in peace. We can and should work together to achieve that peaceful, sustainable, two-state solution with Israelis and Palestinians not just living beside each other, but working with each other and securing peace for the future. Shukran.
I thank Mr. James Curley, the Foreign Minister of the United Kingdom. And now allow me to thank Dear Majesties, Highnesses, and Excellencies, heads of states, heads of governments, heads of organizations and delegations for their addresses, which reflect deep recognition of the current crisis and their keenness on their containing the crisis, the repercussions of the crisis. And now allow me to announce the conclusion of the opening session, and we are going to resume our meeting in 30 minutes. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.